I think I've always wanted to teach, actually. It's all about relationships, and it's all about building up those relationships with the students, with the kids, and trying to get them to see something exciting, and just seeing that light bulb moment of something clicking is just the reason that you do it. Totally.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and we are doing another timey-wimey episode where it is my morning and it is my guest afternoon. Lee Forbes is joining me, but he is logged in via his wife's um, uh, account, so I'm going to try very hard not to call him Hannah as we are talking. Lee, welcome to the job. Welcome to
Thank
the
you.
show.
Thank you, Jesse. Delighted to be here. And you know what? I'll have been called much worse things probably in my time. So if you call me Hannah, it's totally fine.
Well, with my high voice, I am called ma'am all the time on the phone.
Okay.
People think I'm always, in fact, I can very easily call into a company. I hope no one's listening and pretend to be my wife. Hi, this is Linda. And, and so, well, that's great. Well, Lee, tell us a little about yourself.
So I am from Northern Ireland, and I'm 30 years old and a high school English teacher. Um, I suppose if we kind of take it right back, I grew up in a small rural village. Um, and when I mean sort of rural village and small community, I mean there was like one primary school, two shops, a church, a pub, and that was about the height of it, as in Jesse. So very much a small rural community, and just working class people.
Yeah.
Um, my
On your elementary school, like how many people may have been in your class?
like we would have had maybe 20, 25 at most.
Yeah.
And that was sort of even people not just from the village, but people coming in, as in, and I think mine was sort of almost like a bumper year group,
Yeah.
in terms of big numbers. So yeah, quite small in that respect. My mum had been like a childcare assistant, so she had for a number of years. And my dad was just sort of a builder laborer, as in, and they, certainly wanted the best for me in terms of
Yeah.
education and stuff like that. And things. They had stayed together until I was age 7, and then they separated. But I still had a really close relationship, with my dad, and would see him weekly and things like
Oh,
that, and what have you. So I stayed in school until I was 18, and then I went to study at the Queen's University in Belfast.
okay.
So Belfast is about an hour from where I live. I'm now in a town, as in, or a town of Coleraine, and that's about an hour from Belfast, or half an hour from like the Giant's Causeway that people
Okay.
might know of as one of the seven wonders of the world and so on. So I went there and I studied English and theology.
Okay.
And then once I had finished studying that, I did my teaching course that then certified me as being able to teach. And so I've been doing that now for 7 years.
Why teaching?
I think I've always wanted to teach, actually. It's all about relationships, and it's all about building up those relationships with the students, with the kids, and trying to get them to see something exciting, and just seeing that light bulb moment of something clicking
Yeah.
is just the reason that you do it. Totally.
So, any reason why English was your
Um,
choice?
it, I think certainly when I went to my own secondary school, I think sort of about maybe the second or third year there, we were introduced to poetry. And that's a major turn off for a lot of people.
Sure.
But for me, that was when English started to come alive. I couldn't believe that in something that could be so short and so concise, there could be so many hidden meanings and so many layers and so on going on within it. And I think that was when I sort of started to latch into English. And then, sort of by extension, you're looking at poetry, and then you start really to think about the lyrics within songs.
Sure.
And music has been something that I've always really enjoyed and been really passionate about. And so I think the two kind of sort of dovetailed into one another almost.
Yeah, I could see that. So Lee, I always like to start at the beginning. So talk about growing up. You mentioned in this small town, your parents were together till you were 7. What
Mm-hmm.
were they music fans? Was there a lot of music in your house when you started?
I think, yeah, there was. I remember certainly like the top 40 on radio, as in on local radio stations and sort of more national radio stations. Just the radio always being on in the background in the kitchen, and things like that. Um, I vividly remember my mum, would be very much sort of country music orientated almost. So she was a massive fan and is a massive fan of the Eagles and Alan Jackson and those sorts of people of that vein.
Yeah,
Um, my dad then was a big fan of Fleetwood Mac and sort of maybe slightly rockier stuff as well of AC/DC and Meatloaf.
yeah.
So I remember certainly those artists being played a lot at home. And I think that probably sort of sparked my curiosity of artists of that era, as in of
Hmm.
sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, as in particularly 70s and 80s.
I graduated high school in 1977, and there were, Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles were two of the biggest bands.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess I'm both sides of your parents in that way. Um,
I think I always used to get the comment that I was totally born in the wrong decade when it
yes,
came to music taste.
absolutely. So as you started getting older, did you find your own passion? Did you go through a rebel phase where you were going for either grunge or punk or rap or
Do you know, I think actually I was the exception. There was lots of that going on during my time at high school, as in
yeah,
there was definitely a section of those kids who were listening to Nirvana and the grunge aspect of things.
yeah,
Um, Also at that time, bands like the Killers were starting to come up and things like that. And then also sort of dance music,
hmm,
and stuff like that was very popular. Whereas there was me, and on my iPod, whenever we were sitting in class doing art and you were allowed to like listen to your iPod and things like that,
yeah,
my playlist was just sitting full of Fleetwood Mac, of the Eurythmics, of the Eagles, of Elton John, Bonnie Raitt, George Michael, U2. That was all my sort of stuff. So I wouldn't say actually I rebelled from what my parents
hmm,
had listened to. I think I actually took it
embraced it.
on,
Oh, how
embraced it.
funny! And so when did you discover Bruce?
Bruce, and when did I discover Bruce? I think it was kind of known almost amongst classmates and actually teachers that I loved
Okay,
that era of music, because if we were doing stuff in like an art workshop where we were talking about poetry in English or something like that, something might have come up, and I, in my own mind, I'd have been like, that's very similar to a lyric in a
hmm,
particular song or a particular band or something like that. Um, and I remember my one of my English teachers, who was a man called John McCulley,
okay,
and he had heard that I was a massive fan of Fleetwood Mac and that I was going to see Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles over the course of a particular year and stuff. And he said to me, "You've got to listen to Bruce.
ah,
You've
okay,
just got to listen to Bruce." And I was like, well, I know who Bruce is. I know the sort of born in the USA and things like that. And probably in my own sort of ignorance and youthful naivety, I was probably one of those people who was like, this is this patriotic, just nationalistic anthem, rather than really
Sure.
understanding the true meaning at that time of it. And anyway, I took on his words, you've got to listen to Bruce. And I think I remember looking up just online what was his most recent release and giving
Okay.
it a go. And this would have been in around about sort of 2009, something like that. And so it would have been Working on a Dream.
Right.
And I remember listening to it and enjoying some of it, but maybe feeling just a little bit ambivalent. It maybe hadn't kind of fully grasped me
Right.
just at that stage. So I remember going back to him and he was like, have you listened to Bruce yet? And I was like, yeah, I have. And I think he sensed that sort of slight coldness or ambivalence. And he said, right, you need to get yourself hearing some of his live material. And I was like, okay. So he said, start out with either the like Live in Barcelona or Live in New York DVD.
Okay.
So I remember going down after school one day to like the record store has in,
Yeah.
and picking up Live in Barcelona and sitting that evening and watching it. And I was like, I get it now. I get the interaction that's going on with the audience. I see some of the songs, the Working on a Dream thing. I can see where that can go in a live show.
Yeah.
But this is something different. And of course, the Live in Barcelona show comes sort of following the Rising, or as part of the
Right.
Rising tour. And so that was then, I suppose, the English part of me that always wants to find out what's the context to something, what has influenced something, starts to delve a little deeper. And of course, the significance then of 9/11 and the influence of that and what was going on in the country on the Rising.
Because
Um,
that was you've already answered my next question is, the Live in Barcelona is during the Rising tour, and so I'd wondered if you understood the context of some of the songs that's from the
mhm.
Rising, and it isn't totally about 9/11, but it certainly,
Sure.
influenced him, and there was a lot in there. So did did that kind of spark the English fan in you, like, oh, he's actually discussing historical events or social events.
Yes, absolutely. I think again, 9/11, when 9/11 actually took place, I was only 11 years old.
Right.
And so I remember the images vividly
Sure.
at that time and so on. But as you say, it was probably then starting to delve into the Rising and so on, and understand this is a man who comments on historical, on the social, um, and there is a great deal of social commentary and
Hmm.
personal commentary going on within Bruce's music and his lyrics. And I think that then clicked with the English side
Yeah.
of things for me.
Well, as someone who has, you're a young man, you have found that poetry is speaking to you. Do you think that, and this is kind of an obvious question, but the lyrics and how well he portrays a story in his songs, do you think that really spoke to you once you got into it as someone who's recent, who was exploring poetry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that probably one of, setting aside the music, because I absolutely love the music, the
Yeah.
intensity of the E Street Band, both collectively and individually, because I always had a fascination for piano and drums. And whenever I was younger, we frankly couldn't afford a piano, or for me to like take up piano lessons and stuff like that. I didn't do that until kind of like secondary school, that I started doing a wee bit of work on a keyboard, and things like that. So I've always kind of had that fascination. And I suppose if I was picking some of my favorite songs, they are very much piano or drum driven.
Okay. Yes.
Um, but if we leave aside the music, then definitely it's the lyrics, it's the imagery, it's the narrative that Bruce is able to construct, and how he's able to say something so succinctly, in the same way I suppose much as poetry does, so succinctly, and yet it's like a sledgehammer to you when you grasp it. It just cuts deep, or you just have this moment of realization, moment of empathy, moment of sympathy for the characters, or just are able to, I suppose, see yourself
Hmm.
within it. Um, there's just something about it.
Yeah.
There's just something about it that speaks to you and about you.
Yeah. Do so you've discovered live at Barcelona. I assume you started exploring other albums.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that, then it was, going all the way back to the start
Yeah.
of the discography. And, you know, I think it maybe took me a little longer to warm to the first two albums of Greetings and The Wild, the
Yeah.
Innocent. But of course, then whenever Born to Run hits and you follow on through Born to Run, The River, Nebraska, Born in the USA, Tunnel of Love, those are just out of this world outstanding albums.
Yeah.
And there was always something within them. In fact, there were so many things within them. And I think that's where, okay, this guy isn't just a sort of one trick pony where he's writing about something socially on one album, i.e., The Rising. This has been something that you can trace all the way through his career. And I was like, I need to know more. I need to know more.
Yeah, it is kind of you know the casual fan, and in fact I had this discussion right last year when David Fodor, who's a big Bee Gees fan,
Hmm.
was on the podcast, and we had this similar discussion of that when people say, well, I don't like Bruce Springsteen. I go, well, have you listened to anything besides Born in the USA? And David said, same thing. People who don't like the Bee Gees, have you listened to anything besides Saturday Night Fever soundtrack?
Hmm.
Um, it is kind of one of the beauty of Bruce fandom is the diversity of his catalog and how
Absolutely.
many different. In fact, I've often, and I haven't done this, but I'm always tempted to try to, the same way that Bob Dylan has eras, or like Picasso has different eras, there are different eras of Springsteen's, career.
Hmm.
And I always think that's an interesting thought of, where, the post reunion tour, and then, like the Broadway years, all this different ways he's doing things.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that idea of kind of placing into an era or categorizing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's something that would be, on the face of it, it seems quite simple to do, but I think it
Yeah.
actually could be quite difficult.
Yeah, I think so
Because
too.
with sort of the trajectory of things and how much there's overlapping, and bearing in mind when some of the songs may have initially been created but not actually recorded or placed on an album.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, because Western Stars was actually recorded, several years before he released it.
Mhm.
And what are your thoughts on like Western Stars and Letter to You?
I love them both. Um, Western Stars in particular, I don't know why. I think I've probably listened to Western Stars a little more than Letter to You, actually.
Yes.
And I didn't think I would have done that, but I have done. Again, I'm not sure if it's the fact of the characters, the characterization, what that kind of double meaning of Western Stars means within the title.
Hmm.
And I'm so hooked on Moonlight Motel and Stones in particular.
Yeah.
Um, Up from Western Stars. That is nothing against Letter to You, because I adore Letter to You, and I think sort of that run of songs on it, such as The Power of Prayer, Rainmaker, If I Were the Priest, amazing. There are so many days on my commute to work where I'm sort of in the last 5-7 minutes of my journey, and I put it on If I Were the Priest, and there's nothing like rocking up to school with that guitar solo that ends If I Were the Priest, and
Yes.
it just sets you up for your day. So I really enjoyed the latest two albums.
Um, I felt like Western Stars in a lot of ways could almost be a collection of Elmore Leonard short stories or Zane Grey
Mm,
short stories, right? So it is a very cinematic and literary album. It is
Absolutely.
filled with little short stories.
Totally.
So I could see why that would appeal to you. Um,
Totally.
do you do you try to put Springsteen into your curriculum with your
I do,
students?
where possible. Now, given sort of the pandemic of the last year and a half, it's been really difficult to get course content
Sure.
covered within the time. So there's not a great deal of time to do extra things that you would like to do. But certainly in the past, um, I have included some song lyrics and things like that, and put those in front of kids to
Yeah.
analyze for their devices, or to kind of tell me, well, where do you think this has come from? What's it about? And then
Hmm.
I do a reveal that this is actually a song, and this is a song by this man called Bruce Springsteen. Ask your parents, but you need to hear him,
Oh, very
and stuff
nice.
like that. So yeah, I
Hmm.
have been known to do that.
Good. Well, I always like to preface this with the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are, but have
Okay,
you been able to see him live? And if so, how many times?
I have.
Okay.
I have been able to see him live, and I've seen him 3 times, Jesse.
Okay.
3. So it kind of, as I said, initially it took me a little while just to get him, as in
Sure.
within that sort of period of like 2009. So I missed out on the Magic tour and the Working on a Dream tour. And so my first time seeing him was in July of 2012 in
Hmm.
Dublin.
Hmm.
And I went with my mum. I
Oh,
took my
okay.
mum. So I did, because I had been playing Bruce loads, and he'd been on a lot in the kitchen, and she had been converted, and she really wanted to see him as well. And that was the show in Dublin where they had previously played the day or two before at Hyde Park,
Oh, okay.
and he had broken the curfew, and
Yes.
they had shut him down in the mid of Twist and Shout.
Yes.
So, of course, his entrance to Dublin then was literally kicking in about a minute and a half into Twist and Shout. And then he followed that up with I Fought the Law, and the Law won, of course.
Yes.
So you could kind of tell just the humor and the energy following on from that show. And then we were straight in to Badlands. And it was like, I'm here. I have arrived. I am seeing absolutely the boss, the
That
absolute boss when it comes to live performance.
I can imagine that excitement. I do remember seeing that video where, him and little Steven come out and there was a little amp and and they're having
Yeah,
so much fun with it.
they were. It was so comical. So it was just the two of them. There was a lot of fun and a lot of laughs that night
Hmm.
built into the opening, and again then at the end of the show.
Yeah.
Totally.
So what other two shows did you go to?
Well, actually, I printed out the set list, funnily enough, just of the 3 shows that I've been to, Jesse,
Yes.
just in advance of this. And I remember as well, just on that first show, um, kind of prior to sort of what would be classed as his encore at that time, he did My Hometown, which he dedicated to Bono being in Dublin.
Okay.
He then followed that into The River, and then The Rising and Land of Hope and Dreams. And it was just such a powerful foursome, um, of that moment. And I think just again the intensity, taking it down My Hometown, the poignancy of that leading into The River, and then The Rising and bringing into Land of Hope and Dreams just that sense of celebration and hope and promise. It was brilliant. And in the encore, then he did Born in the USA and Born to Run back to back. And I
Hmm.
thought I died and gone to heaven just with
Sure.
the two straight back to back. Um, I remember as well just us being there, and these were the shows, of course, following Clarence's death, and
Right.
they played 10th Avenue Freeze Out, and of course they had the montage of the moments with Bruce and Clarence and Danny interjected there, and just the crowd, even though such an energetic, lively song, um, the crowd was very still actually during it, almost while those moments were going on, and breaking into spontaneous applause when the big man joined the band, and everything just slows
Sure.
down for that moment. Um, and this was also then the show that I think during American Land, which was the last song of the set, that Jake injured himself. And
Mm.
I believe the next night he ended up playing a sax from a wheelchair.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea what happened,
Okay.
unless there was maybe a little too much Guinness consumed, but I
Yes.
don't know. So you'd asked then about the next shows, or the other remaining two shows. The second one was a little bit closer to home, so it was in Belfast,
Right.
in the King's Hall in Belfast, almost a year or just over a year after. It was July 2013, and for that one, I took my dad,
Oh,
and
nice.
this was my dad's first ever concert. He had
Wow.
never been to see a live music performance from a big artist ever before, so he hadn't. So, because I think probably for the full year I had been raving, being like, "You have to go and see Bruce. The next time Bruce is here, we're going."
Yeah.
And I think I remember that show probably the best because this was during the time where, um, in European shows, he was sometimes coming out and doing little pre-show acoustic sets.
Right.
So I remember saying to my dad, "We've got to get there super early. We've got to be standing in line to try and get in." And of course, he's thinking, "This is madness. The show doesn't start until like 5 hours time. What are we doing here?"
Yeah.
It was sweltering as well. It was absolutely boiling heat wise. And all of a sudden, the line started moving, and we were like, "I'm being let in this early. This must mean something." And so we got in, and we ended up in the pit. And maybe about 40 minutes to an hour passes, and all of a sudden there's some activity going on the stage, and Bruce comes out with his guitar, and he performs the 5-song acoustic set. And that was Surprise, Surprise, Maria's Bed, Growing Up, In Dreams, and This Hard Land. And I just thought, you know what? As a 5-song piece, we could just go home now. That was
Yeah,
just perfect.
exactly. Right. Okay.
That
Yeah.
was
We go
just
like, okay.
perfect.
Yes.
It was like, you've got it all. Surprise, surprise, literally. Surprise, surprise. I'm coming
Yeah.
out and doing a little set for you. Maria's Bed really took me by surprise, obviously, just in
Sure.
terms
I
of
am
who
too.
performed
Yeah.
it.
Imagine.
And it was wonderful. And then you get a little bit of Growing Up. You're back from the beginning, a little cover thrown in, and then you end with This Hard Land. It has all of the elements of the, a great flowing whole set, whole show.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so that was incredibly memorable. I think that, and also he did about 4 songs in a row from Nebraska,
Hmm.
which were Reason to Believe, Johnny 99, Atlantic City, and Nebraska itself.
Yeah.
And those were lovely to see. So they
Oh,
were.
I imagine.
That was a great night, definitely a great night. And then the third show, keeping this in the family affair, the third show and the last one that I've seen was during the River Tour in 2016, again down in Dublin. And I took my wife in that instance. She had become my wife in those intervening years.
Yes.
And she, again, always hearing me raving about Bruce and having it on the background every time we went on a car journey. Bruce would be going on in the car. I was like, "You've got to come and see this." And so
Sure.
she did. And again, another fantastic night. Just some really great standouts. Jesse, like, he opened with Darkness, which was a brilliant opener. The standout, I think, of the evening was there was a sign request for Back in Your Arms, which was just lovely. And he did his whole intro and whole talk, about having wronged someone. And it was just lovely. Um, and I vividly remember an even younger couple, like about 16, 17, who were just in front of us. And when they played Cadillac Ranch, they went absolutely ballistic. They were so happy, bouncing up and down. And just to see that joy, because his live shows are incredibly joyful for the most part.
Yes,
There's
they
always
are.
poignancy a little bit at times. He knows when to bring it up and bring it down and then move it back. But there was just such joy that evening. It was brilliant.
Well, I've mentioned this multiple times on the podcast, and I know you've listened to a fair episodes. And by the way, thank you. You sent a very wonderful email saying how much you've enjoyed the show, and that's how we connected.
Yeah.
But I do think that during the River Tour in 2016, they there was an awareness that the road behind them is longer than the road in front of them,
Hmm.
and that there is a finite amount of time left where they will get to play together. And I
Yes.
do think that there is a sense of joy that they are enjoying every moment on stage that they are getting to perform. And
Mm.
so I do think that what I love the idea, Lee, is you, and I won't put words in your mouth, but you've been able to share 3 shows with the 3 most important people in your life:
Totally.
your mother,
That's
your father, and then your lovely bride.
No, you've summed that up really well, Jesse. And my wife, I think, was so Bruce is like my number one, and
Yeah,
I think my number two is probably Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks.
right.
And she's bored and I almost of hearing me constantly talk about
Sure,
them. And then it was at that show in seeing Bruce live that she totally got it,
sure.
and she was converted to. And I think again, sort of like the lyrics and the poetry, he played Jungle Land that night as a request, and Jungle Land was like in my list of songs that I needed to see live.
Right.
And she knew how special that was for me. And I think again, just his writing within that, outside the streets on fire in a real death waltz. She
Yeah.
was like, I get it. I get why this appeals to you now. So
That's
yeah,
that's
no, you're totally correct. I have shared it with my
yeah.
3 most important people.
That's great. That's wonderful. So the hopefully, let's talk about songs and albums that mean a lot to you.
Hmm.
I know I I send my guests an agenda in advance to kind of think about it. So have you kind of thought about that that
I have, and
uh,
of course you're also doing the songs of your life with some of your
yes.
guests as well. And
Yes.
I've been thinking about that, and in a lot of those instances for those categories, I've like 2 or 3 that I would be trying to decide between.
Yes.
So if I'm ever lucky enough to be invited back to, no doubt some of these will
We
feature.
will absolutely do that. I promise. We will have you back on to do that.
I think it goes without saying, Born to Run.
Yeah.
And I love the intensity of Night.
Yeah.
Um, I love Backstreets. Backstreets, I think, with the piano opening, gripped me from the very
Hmm.
beginning. I love the sort of Bo Diddley beat of She's the One, and
Yes.
Jungle Land with all its imagery just appealed to me. There's always the debate, I suppose, amongst a lot of fans between, is it Born to Run or is it Darkness?
Yeah.
And oh, it's like Sophie's choice, isn't it?
Yes, it
Going on
is.
maybe in some of those instances, and it could be either on any given day. I think like
Racing in the Streets is another beautiful piano song.
Racing in the Street is my ultimate. I think, Jesse, like if he, I'm not a sign person
Right.
at his live shows. But bearing in mind what you said about the reality of all of us having a very finite amount of time
Yeah.
potentially left on any given day, and who knows what the future may hold, given even the world circumstances, I think I may have to take a sign for Racing in the Street.
Okay.
I may need to do that. Promised Land and Darkness, the River, again, it's maybe some of the more ballad songs mixed with obviously the upbeat,
Sure.
the upbeat rockers. I love Independence Day and Stolen Car and The Price You Pay. So it was a real treat to get to hear some of those, of course, within the River tour. Um, at the moment, I've kind of really been spending a lot of time with Nebraska and Tunnel of Love.
Okay.
Um, I think Johnny 99 as a story, as a narrative, um, has has really gripped me of late, and I've
Yeah.
been thinking lots about it, and I'm not sure why entirely, but I
Hmm.
love it, and Atlantic City, etc. Um, Tunnel of Love has always held me for some reason. Um, I think again, just knowing and having read Bruce's autobiography, of course, and where he was at that point personally, I think it just means so much more when you hear those songs and you interpret them in light of his personal circumstances.
Absolutely.
Um, and then of course, sort of moving into Human Touch and him becoming a father, and we have a little boy who's who's 2 now.
Yeah.
And we'd quite a rough start as well. So we did, just when he was born. So kind of factoring a little bit of where he was in there, you're kind of charting, I suppose, your own journey,
Right.
in accordance with Bruce's journey, and seeing so much of yourself and that within his songs and his life too.
Well, Living Proof and Long Time Coming are very parental songs.
Hmm.
And, you know, my son is an adult, but he hit a rough spot, as many young people do. And he was feeling pretty depressed.
Hmm.
There is a great song that Brad Paisley does Letter to You. I don't know if you know the song. If I could write a letter to me back when I was 16, and the
Yes.
lyrics is all about him, what he would tell his 16-year-old self. And that and Land of Hope and Dreams,
Hmm.
where I talked about, um, faith will be rewarded, that
Yes.
we can overcome this, has been a lot to me and my family. But um, I can only imagine, um, you now have a young son and you'll be able to raise him to
Hmm.
love Fleetwood Mac, to love the Eagles, like, from your mother, your father, and then Bruce Springsteen. That's, another generation of music love that you'll be able to share with him.
I know. And I've been very fortunate in that actually I've been able now to kind of fulfill that dream of learning and taking up the piano.
Oh, okay.
And my wife is a like far better piano player than I am.
Yeah.
But I have a number of like Bruce music books, and when he was young, I was sort of playing like little chords and stuff of Because the Night and things
Hmm.
like that. And it's starting to, I think, filter in. He could be crying one moment, and if I go to the piano and play Because the Night, it'll stop.
Oh, how
It'll just stop.
wonderful. That's
So the
awesome.
the influence is there already, hopefully, Jesse.
Yeah. So, Lee, um, let's, hopefully he's going to tour again in
We hope.
2022. And
Hmm.
so, uh, who do you bring next time?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah,
Maybe next time I try and get all 3 of them there.
all four of you
Uh,
to go. Yeah, that'd be
and
lovely.
all 4 of us go, and that might be the next.
I think
That
that
might be
would
the
be.
next move.
Yeah, I actually have a little tear thinking of that. The four of you there, that would be wonderful. Um, so you mentioned about wanting to hear Jungerland live, and you got it. Are there other songs that you would love to hear? And I think most of us do have a little bitty, if not physically written down, a mental checklist of
Yeah,
songs you want to hear.
totally. I think as well, having maybe come to it quite late, and the fact that when Bruce was playing here, within Ireland, as in, at those times, for the majority of them, I was a broke student, and so I couldn't travel outside or beyond here.
Yeah,
Um, and that has maybe limited me in terms then of the songs that I've
sure.
seen, and so my list is maybe a bit longer than some other people's.
Yeah,
We talked about racing in the street.
yeah,
That's definitely up there. I absolutely adore Shut Out the Light, and I would love to hear Shut Out the Light.
yeah,
Um, Again, we've been mentioning their sort of Tunnel, and I love the title track. I love One Step Up and Walk Like a Man. I think it's just such a personal song, and Walk Like a Man, and just I remember that. I think that kind of appeals to me in terms of like my own childhood experience, and then my own wedding day experience as
hmm,
well. So there's quite a number of those. And of course, anything we will be blessed to hear if he does bring out anything from Western Stars. And I'm just so looking forward to hearing some of the Letter to You material as well.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. My my worry, and it's not a true worry, is that they may skip over Western Stars,
Yeah,
because of
I
more
have the same fear,
Letter to
Jesse.
You. Though, I'd love the Tucson Train or Moonlight Motel.
Hmm.
Anything from that would be wonderful. Um, and the the dilemma he has is, how do I mix the songs that people want to hear
Hmm.
with the new material? And like, you know, we think about going back to the beginning of you're watching that DVD live from Barcelona, right? He was
Hmm.
able to mix in a lot of the Rising songs along with, what we would call standards, his other
Yeah,
stuff. So I'm hoping that's going to be where it is, similar to like, when he toured with Magic or,
hopefully.
see, yeah, so that'll be interesting. Um, I, I would love to see, um, the Tunnel of Love is an album that that means a lot to me too. I think it's really brilliant. And like when he was doing album shows, that would have been what I wanted to see him doing, Tunnel to Love from beginning to end. I think would be just lovely to see. I've been able to see a couple songs. In Houston, he did One Step Up as a
Hmm.
sign request. And he makes the joke that the full E Street Band had not done One Step Up since like the late 90s. And he makes the joke, we do not know this. you know, you have made your bed, sir, which cracks me up. Um, any others that you just are on your list?
Definitely, it's nearly the epics, so it is of
Yeah,
racing in the street and back streets as well.
sure. That would be awesome. Yeah,
Definitely.
that would be great. Final thoughts. What have I asked you? What have I not asked you that I should have, Lee?
I think you've covered almost everything, Jesse.
Okay.
Having listened to your podcast, I know that you asked that question, and I was thinking about that to see is there anything that Jesse hasn't asked anyone before, anything like that. And the only thing that I could think of was, is there anyone that like you're listening to now that reminds you of Bruce?
Oh, that's a
Or
great question. Is there someone you're listening to?
and there kind of is, or certainly had been. There's a young guy from the northeast of the UK called Sam Fender,
Okay.
and Sam released his debut album a couple of years ago called Hypersonic Missiles, and it was absolutely fantastic. And he would cite Bruce as like his total inspiration. He's a massive fan of Bruce. He's actually
Mm.
covered Dancing in the Dark and Atlantic City at a number of shows and things like that. So I would definitely urge people to check him out. I think he's again really good at social commentary and succinctly putting things that are so relatable.
Sam Fender.
Sam Fender. Yeah,
Okay, I've made a
absolutely.
note. I will Google him when we finish and check that out. Very
Hmm.
nice. Good. All right, so we got to end with the Mary question.
We do.
I unfortunately, you being an English teacher, my
Mhm.
expectations are pretty high
Oh dear,
on
you better
on
drop those,
I
Jesse.
know. But just in case this is someone you are Lee's friend and you're listening to this podcast because of Lee and you have not heard others, the Mary question is basically came from a wonderful man named Jay Armstrong, who is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired, but every year his honors English class, their senior year, he would take 2 days and they would take Thunder Road and break it down as a poem. Similar to what you were sharing, Lee, that you would do. You would share
Hmm.
lyrics and pretend, and say, and not tell them it was song lyrics. And so they break apart the imagery of the song. They would compare it to other poems similar to like Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And then at the end of the 2 days, the question he would ask his class is, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? So, Lee, that is your question. You have the floor.
She gets in the car.
Okay.
She definitely gets in the car. I think this is Bruce's invitation to Mary,
Yes.
but it is Bruce's invitation to us to get in the car along with him for the journey. And we have been on that journey with him, some longer than others, some for many decades, and some for only a short time. but we have been on that journey, and that journey has maybe ebbed and flowed in terms of people's musical tastes and preferences and so on. People have saw him get married and become a father, and they have got married and become a father and so on. So I feel like we have been persuaded by the invitation of joining him in the car, and therefore Mary will have been persuaded and get in the car also.
I like that. I like that. That's a good ending. That's a good answer. Very nice. Um, and it is one of the things that I am very proud of, and is that we all have our own journey, and I really like how you spoke about some of us have been on this journey with Bruce longer than others,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all just as important and intense to us. Like Laura, who's been on the show a couple times, and we just did Songs of Her Life. She's like 19,
Mm-hmm.
but she grew up listening to Born in the USA, and she's going to Broadway to see him the first time. And
Mm-hmm.
she is just as passionate as fan as Dan French, who has been on the show multiple times, that saw him way back, in the 70s, and has seen him so many times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can't judge the fandom based on the years. It's the passion and love. And
Totally.
there is someone out there just discovering Bruce this summer,
Mm-hmm.
and is becoming enthralled, and is going through, of course, now then you don't have to go to record stores, you can go
Yeah.
online, but I virtually going to record stores. And uh, I remember when I first discovered the Beach Boys, every record store I'd go to the B section, and I
Mm-hmm.
would scan just to see, is there an album I don't have, or
Yeah.
is there a cassette I don't have? And so there are people doing that are going through Spotify and finding Bruce
Mm-hmm.
songs, and going to, online, whether it's Backstreet or Amazon, and ordering stuff.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a beautiful thing.
It is. What a treat that lies ahead for them.
Yeah.
What a treat that lies ahead for them. Definitely.
And, and what's fascinating, and I mentioned this a lot on the podcast, and I wish I could remember who told me that, but it might have been Bud. But the guy that talked about, he was there at the reunion show thinking, this is it. This is the peak of Springsteen fandom. It's never going to get better than this. And he
Mm-hmm.
had no idea
What
the
was to come.
rising, Wrecking Ball, Broadway, Western
Mm-hmm.
stars. It's just amazing. So, well, Lee,
Absolutely.
this has been a blast. I hope you had fun.
I have. I
Good,
so have. I have
good.
enjoyed it very much, Jesse. Thank you.
So, any final thoughts you want to share?
Um, roll on 2022, and
Yes.
hopefully some tour announcements. And thankfully, I maybe don't fall into the category of broke student any longer. And
Okay.
in knowing that, as we've said, just how finite and how delicate everyone's situation is, I would love to be able to see more of that man this time around.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm right there with you. My wife keeps shaking her head, going, "Oh, when he tours, it's going to be bad." And then I go, "No," I said, I will not put our mortgage on. I will not take our mortgage money and spend it on tickets. But yes, I will eat cold bologna sandwiches to save money to be able to see as many shows as I can. So Lee, are you on any social media or anything so that someone can reach you?
Well, I am on Twitter, albeit that I kind of just sit and scroll for things that I'm
Okay.
interested in and stuff like that. So I'm on Twitter, and the handle is at Lee770.
Okay.
But that's probably about the height of it, Jesse.
Okay. All right. So at Lee770, if someone wants to reach you.
Mhm.
So what's your son's name?
Oliver.
All right. Well, uh, you, Hannah, and Oliver, go enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I
We will.
appreciate you so much visiting with me. Listeners, you please, um, be safe. Go get vaccinated. Let's knock this virus back to where it belongs, where we can get back to see live music and enjoy each other's company, because being good to each other is the only way we're going to get through this. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, Jesse.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Merry Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.